the Triad of Transformation, the Uranus Neptune Pluto constellation of the mid-20s, 2020s. And this video today is about the Neptune Pluto cycle and the spirit of our times.
Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for following the channel and for subscribing and commenting and doing all the good things that you do. The like button really helps. The Triad of Transformation, we've been talking about it a lot. Got quite a few videos on it already. So what is a Triad of Transformation?
When we've been talking about Triad of Transformation, we've been talking about how all three collective planets, so those planets that which we are aware of past Saturn, that we can't see with the naked eye, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, how they're all making a constellation, and they're all going to be switching signs together during this mid-2020s. So it's a pretty powerful, cool time. And we're just trying to, well, personally, I'm just trying to ever understand it and witness what's happening and look to the past to see what similar things may have happened and understand what changing of the era we're in. Yeah.
So when we refer to the Triad of Transformation, we refer to Pluto entering into Aquarius. We just did a video on that.
A good one.
And
We've done two now.
Two, yes. Quite significant. A new era begins. Pluto going to be into Aquarius for 20 years, and it's entered already into Aquarius. It's going to dip back a little bit at the end of the year, and then it's going to go back into Aquarius for good. Then Neptune, we haven't talked about that yet, but Neptune is about to enter into Aries in 2025. And Uranus is about to enter into Gemini, so much so that in the summer and fall of 2025, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus will all be at 1 degree of Gemini, Aries, and Aquarius. Now, we've been experiencing this already last year and this year, but within the wider orb. Now, in 2025, it will be exact, and there will be a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the same time. And throughout 2025, it's going to make some very, very interesting charts, but also the end of 2024 we'll see this Triad of Transformation create some very interesting chart throughout the fall. So stay tuned. We're going to be talking lots more about that. Now, this is a complex story, and we fleshed out Pluto part of the story. Now, today we wanted to talk about the Pluto-Neptune cycle and this Neptune-Pluto sextile. So,
Should I say what a sextile is? Just for those who might
go ahead.
know?
Go ahead.
So sextile is, hopefully I say this right, 60 degrees. And so it's when the signs go from feminine to masculine to feminine to masculine. And so when you're a sign between two signs, that would make 60 degrees, providing the whole thing is 360. And then for a long time, well, we'll be getting into it throughout the video, but sextile just means that they've been in communication within a few degrees, meaning that they're about 60 or around 60 degrees from each other. At this point, have been in feminine signs most recently, and then now with Pluto going into Aquarius, a more masculine sign.
And why don't you explain what an orb is?
An orb. Okay, so an exact sextile would be, say, if Pluto was at 29 degrees of Capricorn and Neptune was at 29 degrees Pisces, that'd be an exact sextile because it'd be exactly 60 degrees in the 360 apart from each other. Now that Pluto has gone into Aquarius at 0 degrees Aquarius right now, I believe. And I don't know the degree of Neptune. I believe it's about 25 degrees. So say it is 25 degrees and 0 degrees. That would mean that there's 5 or 6 degrees difference. And an orb is considered that you give a little bit of space. So similar to how a full moon has that moment of full moon, when the full moon the day before, you usually feel it coming, that would be considered an orb. And the day after there's a exhale that happens, that's still usually associated, that can be considered an orb. So there's degrees on either side where you get to still experience the effect of it without it necessarily being the exact degree.
So for the full moon example, the full moon is exact at a moment, but it's considered full for 2 days. So that exact moment, and then a day on one side and a day on the other, that would be the orb. The orb would be when the planets are experiencing full energetic tension between each other, but it's not quite exact yet. So what's spectacular about this event in the summer of 20 and fall of 2025, but it repeats itself in the summer of 2026 as well, and in the summer of 2027. And it will move out of orb in sometime in 2028, 2029, and it's been within orb for the last 2 years already at times. So this is, and we've been talking about it for quite a while already. Lots of videos on the channel. You can look at the Triad of Transformation playlist, and you can also look at the Astrology of the Great Reset playlist. So Pluto, Neptune, and why don't you take the slide, the first slide, with the pictures of.
Should we, just before I do, I was gonna just quickly and maybe a concise quick form, but do we want to just break down Pluto and break down?
That's what we're gonna do, but I want to start with the pictures.
Sure. Oh yeah, the pictures are a great way to break it down.
Well, so look, here's Neptune on the left and Pluto on the right. So they're really similar, and we don't, in Greek mythology, Pluto is Hades, the lord of hell, and Neptune is Poseidon, the lord of the depth. And they both have a trident, and they look very similar. And I believe they're brothers, and they're brothers with Zeus. And what they have in common, is that they're in charge of the depth. They subterranean gods, and so let's flesh that out symbolically. What does that mean? That they would be gods of the underworld.
When I think of gods of the underworld, I think of death and microbiology and everything underneath the surface and subconscious.
Yes. So it's below the surface. So it's below consciousness. So they rule the unconscious realm. They rule the unconscious realm. So in astrology, we call that a transpersonal planet. They're beyond the personality. From, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, those are the personal planets, with the luminaries and the personal planets. Jupiter and Saturn are our social planets. Everything past Saturn is transpersonal. So it's collective in nature, but it's also unconscious, in that unless we make a lot of effort to become conscious of them, they usually stay beyond the depth. So if you're interested in this subject matter, and we're not historians, we're going to do some historical references, and many of you asked about that, but this book here, Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, it's a 600-page little book that took 30 years to write for Richard Tarnas, and it's about intimations of a new worldview, and it maps out the last 3,000 years of history according to outer planetary alignments, transpersonal planets, with a little bit of Jupiter and a little bit of Saturn. And this is a thorough study of history according to these transpersonal planets. And today's little study is based on that book. Did you read that yet?
Not yet. I'm excited. All of my favorite astrologers recommend it all the time.
It is the most important book of our generation in terms of astrology, and it will give you a profound understanding in these movements. So let's look at the next slide.
All right. So Neptune and Pluto, they look so similar here. Interesting.
Yes, huh? So this is the Neptune-Pluto cycle conjunction, the conjunction from 597 to 577 before Christ entered. It's a 500-year cycle. So just imagine that, a 500-year cycle. Okay, so these are 4 or 5 conjunctions so 597 to 577 before Christ entered.
Or before Common Era now.
Buff and Common Era. Okay, and that's secular. I can dig it. So what happened in that time?
Well, I have no idea.
Well, Richard Tarnas.
Okay.
Okay. He points out that actually around that time, there was a triple conjunction of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and they were all conjoined together, and that was the beginning of the modern time.
Wow.
He talks about.
In what sign?
He doesn't
No,
talk about it.
Yeah.
And well, I didn't dig deep enough into my studies. We have time. We're going to be talking
Next
about
video.
next video. That's right. But what Richard Tarnas points to is that during that time, you had Pythagoras, which is a very important figure in the Greek. He's kind of the first big Greek philosopher. Pythagoras was a far out dude. He, a lot of his teachings still are applied in our modern times, but what people don't realize about Pythagoras is that he was a philosopher and a spiritualist, and he would go into a town and he would lecture there, and half the town would leave with him, and they would join their communities. His communities were called the Brotherhood of Man. They were all vegetarians, and men and women were equal.
Wow.
And that's 2,600 years ago. And that's during the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And so, we think that, some of the ideas that we have are new ideas. Well, Pythagoras. But during the same time, you had another guy who's getting quite a bit of press these days. His name is Buddha. And so Buddha, Pythagoras, and also Confucius. And right before him, Lao Tse. And so that you had like a kind of spiritual revolution that really animates what this Neptune-Pluto conjunction is. So we're talking about fleshing out, and this is a good example of what that is. But so what is Neptune and what is Pluto? They're very complex planets because they rule the depth. And so they're deep, literally. So Hades, the Lord of death, or the Lord of Hell. What's your experience in that?
Well, it reminds me of reading the Astrology of Fate and how much fate and Pluto are intertwined, and also death, and how there's this idea, and always has been, of like your death was already chosen the moment you were born, but we don't get to know it. Kind of thing. So there's this fate piece, or this like having to just trust in the process and know that your time will come when you have to leave this physical experience. There's also this piece of, for some reason, I think of like not judgment, but how karma.
Fate,
Work.
karma,
Yeah.
judgment, for sure.
Yeah.
Ancestors.
Yes.
If Psyche and Cosmos is the most important book of this generation, the Astrology of Fate is the most important astrology book of the previous generation. You know, because came out in the 1980s. This came out in the early 2000s. So you know, this is the most important book of this generation. And then the Astrology of Fate is the other most important book of the previous generation. And it fleshes out Pluto really nicely, and they did a good job. Now, what about Neptune?
Neptune, I've had a pretty hard time grasping over the years. It's I know it's associated with like illusions and things that are hard to be tangible, but it's also the spiritual planet and like of spiritual philosophy or spiritual inclinations.
Did you ever make it through Neptune, The Quest for Redemption by Liz Green?
I haven't read that one yet.
Oh, well, that's the next generation.
I feel this, I don't know. Which one would you say first?
Well, you read the Astrology of Fate already.
Yeah.
Neptune,
Okay.
because that's a masterful. So Liz Green wrote Pluto in the 80s, and she wrote Neptune in the 90s.
Okay.
And then this came out in 2000. So if a generation is 10 years, there you go. We got the last three most important books. But Neptune, The Quest for Redemption. So so Pluto is about destiny and the ancestors and death. Neptune is about the experience of salvation. You know, and we can experience salvation in different ways, right? We can have a really awesome spiritual practice and be transcendent. We experience salvation that way. We can be very religious, but we can get really high too. And that's an experience of salvation as well. It's whatever it takes to experience transcendence, and to let go of the connection of the material world, and to be in the baptism, the waters of baptism of, you know. So it's the quest for redemption. So we want to save the soul. And so we want to save the soul, Neptune, and the destiny of the soul, Pluto. So then those two together as a cycle, we can see the first one in our era is at the time where Buddha and Confucius, Taoism, and Pythagorean, you know, philosophy, and the beginning of Greek philosophy. But also at that time, you had all of the Jewish prophets and all the stories of the Old Testament. So then that's the foundation of the spiritual cultures of our time.
I get why you say now it's like the beginning of the modern age.
Well, it's the beginning of our modern age, and it's where all the greatest myths that we, you know, Osiris and Isis and you know all of that incredible mythology that came out of that time, which is still relevant today, and that's where these gods, you know, come from, you know. And for those, again, with Pythagoras mapped out. He made the music of the spheres. He made a musical scale by calculating the distance between the planets, and came out with the music of the spheres, which was one of the first musical sphere. There are sound healers that still use that same calculation of Pythagoras to calculate their tuning forks according to the different planets. You know, so you know, foundational. So then let's look at the next one, the next conjunction.
So that was oh gosh, how do you even say that? 2,600 years ago?
2,600 years ago, yes. Then we have 85 to 82 before whatever you called it again. So then, you know, that's the beginning of the age of Pisces.
Right before.
And the whole Christian symbolism, and you know, the peak of the the Roman, not quite the peak of the Roman, but really we're coming from Greek times into Roman times. And then this great compensation that happened to the materialism of our time, of those times, is the appearance of Christ and the beginning of those times. So then another great spiritual shift occurs around the second conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to see, you know, this evolution of redemption and destiny, you know, and the Lord of the depths and their angular relationship. And we don't talk about, you know, the squares or the oppositions, because then that would be so much material, but that's something that we, you know, can look into as well. So then 410 to 413. And again, if you take the orbs and you look at periods of about, you know, 100 years long, you know, 50, 60 years, if you calculate an 8-degree orb. Richard Tarnas uses a 10-degree orb, you know, so then these are long periods of time. So this 5th century after Christ appeared is a very important time in the development of the, you know, because the first 1,000 years of the Christian era, the Christians are just still figuring it out. And you have the Gnostic movements, and then you have the Manichaeans, and you have the early alchemists of Alexandria, who you know, and so then you have mythology of Egypt and early Jewish mythology, and then you have the Greek, and then the Manichaeans, you know, with their god Mani, who was the main god of the Roman army. And so it was much more diversified spiritually, and Christianity was developing, you know, out of that hotbed, especially the arguments that took place between the Gnostics and the Jews and the Christians. Christianity developed, and there were some very powerful. And then St. Augustine came, and he was kind of the guy that kind of put it all together philosophically. There were other thinkers, but that's that 500, and that's right at the beginning where the, you know, of the Roman Empire starting to fall apart. You know, so the Roman Empire lasted 800 years, you know, from before Christ to after Christ, a period of about 800 years, taken over from the Greeks. And then the fall of the Roman Empire created a huge, you know, they called them, after that, they called it the Dark Ages, you know, because then, you know, we have a return to barbarianism, and then Christianity kind of had very weak pockets. And then that brings us to the third conjunction that we're looking at, which is the millennium. So 904 to 906. And again, that's the exact, but if you give it a 10-degree orb, you're looking at a 100-year, you know, period. And now we're very much in the Dark Ages, but we're starting to come out of the Dark Ages. And this is where it's really fascinating, is in the next one. And it's almost,
so if they're 500, is this like 14? Oh yeah.
so this is a really key time, especially the next 100 years. So the Roman Empire fell apart, but Constantinople and the Byzantine Roman Empire. So there were two Roman empires. There was the East and the West. The West, Rome, fell to the Visigoths in like 700 after Christ, you know, right around that time. But Constantinople, the capital of the Roman Emperor Constantine, which was in Turkey, which was the Byzantine Empire, didn't fall to that date, around that date. And what happened is that all the libraries of ancient knowledge all were transported to Italy, and that is what created the Renaissance.
I thought that's when they were burned.
No, they were not burned. They were all taken by boat by the Europeans and brought to Italy. And now the Italians, that's what took Europe out of the Dark Ages, is that great library. And then all of a sudden you got the Neoplatonists and you got all of the mystical dudes inspired by those books, and they started translating.
So this is the Renaissance. This is
That's
the beginning of the Renaissance.
That's the beginning of the Renaissance that was caused by that. So that's 1397 to 1400. Now, a couple of very important things that happened in that particular cycle of conjunction with Uranus, with the Pluto and Neptune, is that one, the printing press happened, at the end of the 15th century, so 1497 or something like that. Also, that's first contact. That's the first white people coming to North America, 1497.
European, yeah.
The first European coming to North America and South America, first contact. What else happened then? The printing press, also the Reformation. And the split of the Catholic and the evolution that took place between Protestants and Catholics, but also the Orthodox, and so then we have a real, and with the printing press too. Before that, all the books, they were written by monks in monasteries by hand. And then the printing press came, and the Byzantine library coming and create the Renaissance. So then again, Uranus, Neptune, Neptune Pluto conjunction, major breakthrough in the redemption. Neptune, Pluto, fate, destiny. They seem to have a correlation with spirituality and the evolution of the depths of the human soul.
Beautiful.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Very.
How are we doing so far?
Good.
Got questions?
Ooh, do I have questions? Not so much. It's very neat to look at these conjunctions. I think we should continue, and then I might have a couple more when we're done this slide.
Well, now we come to the next one, which is our current one, because again, it's a 500 cycle. So then the next one comes in 1891 to 1893. If you give it, 20 years on both sides, so then we're looking at 1880 to, 1910 or something like that. So that's what happened during that time.
Is that the Industrial Revolution?
Well, it's a lot. The Industrial Revolution, the steam engine came much earlier, 1860s, 1870s. By the 1900s, you got train from coast to coast, from Montreal. You could take the train from Montreal to Victoria. You could take the train all the way in the southern states, everywhere, that's the real beginning of the modern age, so we looked at the different times of the conjunctions of Neptune, Pluto. These begin 500-year period of time that are kind of different chapters in the evolution of the modern man. And so then, what happened in those years, spiritually, in terms of the people that were there around that time, you had Nietzsche, of course, who really, spoke a lot about, the fate of the Superman and God, the gods being dead. But you also had Jung and Freud, and the concept of the unconscious, which were Neptune and Pluto, right? but you also add Madame Blavatsky and Steiner and all of the dudes associated with the Circle of the Golden Dawn. You had the first Rider-Waite Tarot published at that time. Steiner was a student of Blavatsky, and then he went on and did his thing. But Aleister Crowley was a follower of Blavatsky, and then Annie Besant, who took over for Blavatsky, went to India to get Krishnamurti. And so then we had the whole New Age movement of theosophy and anthroposophy in Christian Science and all kinds of mystical traditions. You had William James, who the transcendentalists, you had all kinds of really far out people that kind of took the Renaissance and the American and the French revolutions and the evolutions of science. And so that was a real bedrock of what we're going through right now. So we're starting to flesh this out, and we're going to focus on what's going on with the Pluto Neptune. Do you have any questions now?
No, I feel like it's really helpful to see how the evolution of things go. I definitely am not someone who's particularly great at history. I find it fascinating, but it's not something that clicks for me so easily. And to see the evolution of one aspect of human consciousness added on and how it continuously evolves is really helpful.
Well, Cosmos and Psyche, but also if you study Jung directly, he will flesh it out in terms of the history of mysticism. Things that we didn't talk about is the history of alchemy, Gnosticism, and then there's all kinds of during that the one before the last one, so the 1400 one there, that's when what's his name was alive, Paracelsus, the founding father of modern medicine, but also the herbal guy who said you don't need to go to the pharmacy. What you need to do is go in your garden, because that's where all the medicines are. And so Jung puts all of that evolution in context. Cosmos and Psyche is 600 pages, and then Jung's work is 18 volumes. So I haven't studied this history, but through the lens of Jung and astrology. And so, but yeah, there's so much more to be studied in that whole history.
Medicine's really neat. That's also when tissue salts were first discovered in homeopathic medicine, that 13 to 1400, end of the 1300s.
And these things really came back to forefront in the 1890s, and and so many happened. So now, what are we going through in our times right now? And this is fascinating. So this Pluto-Neptune sextile we're talking about, in terms of Pluto and Neptune being 60 degrees apart. We talked about the history of Pluto.
Should we show them should we speak to the last one or no?
Hold on a second.
Okay.
We talked a lot about Pluto and how Pluto's ecliptic is kind of odd, right? When it goes through Libra, through Aquarius, it moves much faster. Well, during that time, it actually moves at the same speed as Neptune. So that Neptune and Pluto have traveled together through the 20th century and into the 21st century, moving at relatively the same speed. So that Pluto and Neptune have been in sextile since 1939, and they're going to be in sextile till 2039. So this sextile relationship of Neptune and Pluto It's in about every single chart you draw for the last 100 years. So your mother, as a sextile of Neptune and Pluto, and you have a sextile of Neptune and Pluto, and your grandmother has a sextile of Neptune and Pluto. So this Neptune and Pluto sextile, if we look at the base, the birth of the cycle, which is at the turn of the century between the 19th century and the 20th century, and then from 2039 on, and it comes in and out, a little bit, at some times, but then this is kind of the overarching, steady story of our times. That's why I use the word spirit of our times. So, what does that mean? And we don't need to store the slide. What does that mean? So how do we interpret that sextile between Neptune and Pluto? And we're going to see that coming to exactness, and it's going to be pretty much exact from now till 2030, and then it's going to start moving apart. And by 2039, it's no longer going to be a sextile. Now Neptune and Pluto are going to move to the square, which doesn't come for another 40, 50 years. I didn't check. But so what's the archetypal, what does that mean to us, this sextile, and how it's been active for 100 years, and it was born at the conjunction, and we've seen all the conjunctions before that of how Pluto and Neptune, the redemptive spirit and the destiny point, so we got the archetype of destiny and the archetype of redemption, which is like karma and spirituality, karma and dharma, or it's like so, and it's kind of what we've been going through is throughout World War II, and the becoming of technology, and everything that's happened in the last 100 years. There's one underlying thread, and that is the rebirth of spirituality. We talk about that in terms of the age of Aquarius, but I think that Pluto Neptune sextile is this deep, deep longing for redemption and for healing of, or finding my destiny. What, like we always confronted, and we've been confronted. One, we got confronted with World War II, and then we had a big, huge existential crisis that went into the 60s. And during the 60s, we had that sextile. And then the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And then, the beginning of the new millennium, there's always been this crisis of, okay, what's up or down? Humanity, to its evolution of its science and its technology, has forgotten its spiritual roots. And so then Neptune and Pluto kind of work underground to try to bring about this redemption of the spirit through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It also makes me think of like how there's this huge collective movement. It often seems like almost unconscious to like and like a driving need to connect with ancient practices in your family line to find redemption. Like I see so many people looking to learn how to crochet or how to knit or how to paint, like all these old skill sets, and even in herbal medicines, or like right now how castor oil and sea salt are some of these most ancient old practices that are coming back, and it's like this collective drive to learn how to integrate these old practices back in. Also the huge spiritual movement that is happening, and it's kind of like, I don't know, icky and sticky sometimes, and it's getting modernized and technology is part of it, but
Well, it's the thing
It's
is
a new thing.
we have lost connection with the ancient times and we're trying to bring it back, and yet we don't have access to that knowledge. And that's why Jung's work is so important, because he defines these rituals and practices from a scientific perspective and how necessary these practices are for spiritual health. So he combines modern scientific approach to mysticism and to all of these incredible practices that took thousands of years to develop for the human psyche. And so then with the lens of the Neptune Pluto cycle, we can really enter into an understanding of the deep meaning of our times. And this is just one of the components of the Triad of Transformation. The next one we'll do is we'll do the Uranus Neptune, and then we'll do the Uranus Pluto. If you like this one, subscribe, share that. Got a whole lot more material on the channel for you to take advantage of. How is this for you?
It's a lot of information. It's good. I think I'll be sitting with this information for the next few days and probably processing it as I live. But I'm curious to dive into it maybe on our next video on when it connects with Saturn. Do you think that's gonna, even just as a quick answer, do you think it's gonna limit this, or do you think it's actually going to bring this more into our personal experience?
Well, the Saturn is the mastery of the self.
Right.
And we have to look at Saturn-Neptune conjunction. You know, we can do a whole video on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And then we just experienced the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020. That was very significant. And so now this is the sextile of that. Anyway, we got time, you know, we're going to be talking about this for the next few years. And this is just another step on the way. And was that clear?
Yeah, I think it was clear. It's just a lot to think about and sit with, but it's clear to me. Hopefully it's clear to you.
Well, hopefully we did a good job of fleshing it out for you. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for supporting us. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye for now.
Whoop,
Talk soon.